Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Nun Zayin. The Mishnah mentioned a few items that are prohibited to get benefit from it. And so if someone takes any of these items and gives it to a woman as Kiddushin, the Kiddushin is invalid, because if you can't eat it or even benefit from it, then it has no value. You can't sell it, you can't give it as a present, you can't use it for anything. And so the Kiddushin is valid because it's not worth a peruta. So now we're going through the list of items and bringing derivations for how we know that each of these items is prohibited behana'ah. We're up to be'agla arufa. If you have an unsolved murder mystery, then we bring a heifer down to a hard, craggy valley where nothing grows, and we break its neck, kind of reconstructing the violence of that murder, and the elders go there and the kohanim go there and so on. Okay, this heifer is prohibited b'hana'ah. Of course you can't eat it because it didn't get proper ritual slaughter, but you can't even use its skin or give it away or do anything with it. Minalan, how do we know? Amri debe Rabbi Yanai kapara ketiba ke kadashim. Regarding al-gradufa, it says kaper lamecha Yisrael asher padita. The elders that are there say that this should be an atonement for the people. And so you see, this atones just like a sacrifice atones, and a sacrifice is prohibited for general use. So too, something that's kodesh is prohibited. And so therefore, this, even though it's not a sacrifice, technically, because it's not brought in the Bet HaMikdash, nevertheless, it atones like a sacrifice and therefore has the same law. Next, Sipore Mesorah. The birds that a Mesorah brings when he wants to become purified, he has to bring these two birds. This is all done outside of the Bet HaMikdash, because a Mesorah can't even go into the Bet HaMikdash. And you bring two birds, and one of them is slaughtered, and its blood is put into an earthenware vessel with water, and then you take cedar and hyssop and you dip it with the live bird into the blood of the dead bird, and you sprinkle it on him. And this then is not the final atonement. This is just the first step. After he does that, now he can at least come to the Bet HaMikdash. In the Bet HaMikdash, he brings in Asham. The Asham does not confer atonement on him either. The Asham only allows him to eat of the other korbanot that he is going to bring. It's the other korbanot that actually bring atonement. So it's kind of a three-step process for the Mesorah. All this is going to be important. So these birds, we're going to see which one. The birds, we're talking about the dead bird primarily. What about the live bird? We'll have to see about that. And also define exactly when it becomes prohibited, and the live bird, if and when it becomes permitted. The one that remains alive, we send away. We send out into the field. After you dip it and sprinkle with it, then it's set free and stays alive. Okay, so these birds are prohibited behana'ah. How do we know? Minelan. The Tanah de Rabbi Ishmael, your Braita of Rabbi Ishmael, that's a bit cryptic. Ne'emar machshir umchaper mibifnim, v'ne'emar machshir umchaper mibachutz. Okay, there are different types of korbanot or rituals. One is machshir, is an enabler. This is not something, and the other is mechaper. Mechaper are most korbanot, give atonement. You do this, you did a sin, whatever. This gives atonement. Machshir doesn't provide atonement. It only allows the person either to come into the Bet HaMikdash or to partake of the offerings that he gave. So that's called a machshir. Now there are types of machshir and mechaprim that are done in the Bet HaMikdash, and there's also, the Torah also talks about a machshir and a mechaper, something that enables and something that gives atonement that is done outside of the Bet HaMikdash. And so now we're going to learn one from the other. Ma machshir mechaper amor bebifnim asa bo machshir ke mechaper. Something that's machshir inside the Bet HaMikdash, this is referring to the asham of a Mesorah. It's done in the Bet HaMikdash, and it doesn't give atonement, but allows him to partake of the rest of the sacrifices. And so, just like that one is compared to the a mechaper, which is most korbanot that are done in the Bet HaMikdash that give atonement. So they're compared, and therefore the machshir is like the mechaper. Just like the most offerings are prohibited behana'ah, they're prohibited behana'ah from the time that you designate the animal until you do the slaughtering and through the sprinkling. After the sprinkling, then animals that can be eaten by the kohanim, then they can be by the kohanim or by the owners and so on. But during that time, from the designation until the end of the blood ritual, they're prohibited b'hana'ah. So that's true for atoning sacrifices. It's also true for enabling sacrifices that are done in the Bet HaMikdash. That's step one. Step two is that we extend that analogy. Just like for the ones that are done inside, you just have the same law, whether it's a machshir or mechaper, you can't get atonement. So too, for the rituals that are done outside of the Bet HaMikdash. The machshir that's done outside the Bet HaMikdash is referring to these birds, the birds of a mesorah. That allows the mesorah to enter the Bet HaMikdash. The mechaper that's done outside is the agla rufa that we just talked about a minute ago. That is, it's right, kapela mecha Yisrael, as we just said. It's an atoning ritual that's done outside. And we just proved that the atoning ritual done outside the agla rufa is prohibited b'hana'ah. So too, we'll compare that to the enabling ritual of the birds of the mesorah, also is asur b'hana'ah. So that's the two steps. The first step is, okay, we already know about the things that are done in the Bet HaMikdash, and in the Bet HaMikdash there is no distinction between a machshir and a mechaper. Both of them are prohibited from benefit. Since we know that, by analogy, we'll make the same equivalence for rituals that are done outside the Bet HaMikdash, and we already know that the mechaper outside the Bet HaMikdash agla rufa is asur b'hana'ah. So too, the machshir, which is the birds, are asur b'hana'ah. Okay, so that's the source. Now we're going to define the time boundaries. When are these birds, and which of the birds are asur b'hana'ah? Itmar, sipore mesorah me'matai asurim. Here it says plural. So it sounds like both of them are prohibited from some beginning point. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan amar mishat shechita, Resh Lakish mishat lekicha. Rabbi Yochanan says from the time that you do shechita, whereas Lakish says from the time that you take them and designate them. So Resh Lakish is more stringent. Rabbi Yochanan amar mishat shechita hu da'asra la. Rabbi Yochanan says, look, when you designate them, you didn't do anything yet. Okay, just designate them, so I could still benefit from them. They're still permitted to me. And it's only when they do shechita, the act of shechita is what makes them prohibited. Resh Lakish amar mishat lekicha me'agla rufa nafka. Ma'agla rufa mechayim af sipore mesorah mechayim. Resh Lakish says, look how we made an equivalence between the birds and agla rufa. So just like agla rufa is already prohibited before its neck is broken, we're going to see from what time before, so too the birds should already be prohibited while they are alive, before the shechita. So now agla rufa gufa me'matai. When is agla rufa prohibited? Amar Rabbi Yonai gibul shamati ba v'shachachti. Rabbi Yonai says, I remember learning something about this, the boundary when it becomes prohibited, but I forgot. V'naspin habraya lomar. But the other sages in the group did remember and said, Yiridata lenachal etan hi osarta. It's when it's brought down to the hard valley, right? You're going to go and find some heifer and designate, that we're going to use this, but that doesn't make it prohibited until you bring it down to that valley, the one that's close, nearby the murder scene, and by just bringing it there, it's already prohibited even before you break its neck. Just getting to that spot, that serves as Resh Lakish's proof. Just like agla rufa is prohibited already from before you kill it, while still alive is prohibited, so too the birds are alive even before you do shechita while they're still alive. Okay, sounds like a good analogy, but we're going to challenge that against Resh Lakish. Ima agla rufa mishat lekicha la mitasera, af sipore mesorah nami mishat the agla rufa is not prohibited from the time that you take it and designate it and use it, but say I'm going to use this, but rather only when you reach that spot in the valley. So too, we should say the same thing with the birds, that from the time that you designate them does not make them prohibited. If you're really going to make the analogy the same, then it's actually, it should be after the designation. So we answer on behalf of Resh Lakish, Hachi hashta hatamit legibul acharina. Hacha mi'it legibul acharina. So it's not the same. When it comes to agla rufa, there is another boundary marker that we have. It has to be something that's before the killing of it. So when it comes to the eglarufa, the Torah says, bring it to this place. Okay, fine. So we have an event, a significant event that we're doing before we kill it. So we said, well, with that we can say as the starting point, it's prohibited from when you bring the eglarufa to that place. However, regarding the birds, there is no other significant event. You designate them and then you slaughter one of them. You don't have to bring it to a certain place. Actually, we're going to see in a second that it does have to be in some kind of certain place, but it's not a definite place. It just has to be near a field, between a city and a field, so that you can throw it from the city to the field. But it's not any definite place. So therefore, there's no other significant marker that would make it prohibited before. The only thing that happens significantly before the shechita is the designation, and so therefore it is equivalent, even though they're not both prohibited from the time of designation. Only the birds are. That's because a gladufa has another significant event that happens between, and that is the bringing it to the valley. So therefore, Resh Lakish says they are equivalent. Now we're going to have a series of challenges from Rabbi Yochanan against Resh Lakish. Iti be Rabbi Yochanan Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish, how could you say it's from the time of designation? Because now we have a derasha. We're going to come back to this derasha in more detail in a few minutes. Kol sipor Torah tochelu lerabot et ha-meshulachat v'zeh asher lo techelu mehem lerabot et ha-shechuta. This pasuk is from Devarim Yud Dalid. It's talking about the kosher and unkosher birds. For the kosher birds, it says, all kol sipor, all kosher birds you may eat. Why do you need the extra word kol? That comes to include the bird that is sent away and is free. Even though, it's at least according to Tosafot, even though it's prohibited during the ceremony, right? Either according to Rabbi Yochanan, let's say from the time of shechita, from the time that you do shechita on one of them, the one that you don't do shechita, that you're going to put its head in, according to the Shakish, from the time that you designate both of them, both become prohibited. But then after you take that live bird and dip it and use it to sprinkle, and then you set it free, then it's permitted. So that's why the word kol comes and says not only all kosher birds are allowed. All comes to include the one that you used that for the Mesorah ceremony, that you set free, that also you can go and eat it afterwards. Now, the other pasuk that says, and these are things that you should not eat, what is that coming to include, this general thing? A general statement as coming to include the one that was slaughtered, the slaughtered bird. Of a Mesorah is prohibited. Now, if you think that the bird already becomes prohibited from the time that you designate it, so then do you need a derasha to teach me that's prohibited after you do shechita? It was already prohibited from the time of designation. Certainly, it's now prohibited when you do shechita. So how will you explain this baraita, Resh Lakish? And Resh Lakish could answer, no, I might have thought precisely that. The same as it is with sacrificial animals, when they're alive, and when you designate and say, this is going to be a korban shelamim. At that point, the animal is prohibited. So that's right, from when it's alive, it's prohibited. But then when you do shechita on that animal, in the Bet HaMikdash, you do shechita, and they do the rest of the blood avodah, then it becomes permitted. Some parts go on the mizbech, some parts the kohanim eat, and the rest the owners eat. So yes, in fact, you have cases, lots of cases, where it's prohibited from the time of designation and then permitted after the slaughter. So I need this derasha to teach me that this bird is not like those. The bird is prohibited from the time of designation, and it remains prohibited forevermore, the dead one, even after you do shechita and you do the whole ritual and you have the rest of the bird there, still prohibited b'hana'ah. So he answers that question just fine. Another challenge, itibeh shechata v'nimset terefa yikach zug lasheniya v'rishona muteret b'hana'ah. Let's say you have these two birds, and you do shechita on one of them, and then you check its esophagus, and you find, it's a terefa. That means it's not kosher, right? It could have happened Because it become a terefa at the time of the shechita. In other words, when you designate it was not a terefa, so this designation is valid. And then at some point later, or maybe when the knife nicked it in the esophagus before the actual shechita, and it's in such a way that it will not live for 12 months. So it turns out that it was a terefa, therefore you cannot use that bird anymore. So now what are you going to do? Well, it's okay. The other bird that you had designated, you can continue to use and just get a second one, right? These are like entangled birds, right? They're dependent on each other. But since one is gone, you can bring another one, and then that will be a new pair. Now, what do you do with the dead bird that was a terefa? That's called hadishona. That you can use muteret behana'ah. Okay, that it's permitted. You can't eat it because it's a terefa, but you can use it for other things. Hold on. If you think, Resh Lakish, that these birds are prohibited from the time of designation, well then the one that you killed that was a terefa was already prohibited from the time of designation, so it should remain prohibited. Why would that be mutar behana'ah? And according to this Mishnah and Negaim, how will you explain that? Resh Lakish answers, he says, no, this Mishnah is not talking about a case where it became a terefa after the designation, in which case the designation makes it asur. The Mishnah would agree that it remains prohibited behana'ah. But rather, here we're talking about a case where the terefa sign was found in its intestines, which means it was terefa all along, even from that time you made a designation. Therefore, unbeknownst to you, because it's inside the animal, you can't see, you designated these two birds I'm going to use for my berza for a mesorah purification. But one of them was terefa, so therefore the designation was never a valid designation and never became prohibited for hana'ah. So even though you only found that out after you did shechita and then went and checked the intestines there, but now you know, and that's why the Rishona, the first one, the one that you killed, is mutar b'hana'ah, because it was never designated. The designation, right now we know, was invalid since it was a terefa animal all along. Good. We answered that question. Another challenge. The proper way of doing slaughter is, first you should get the hyssop and the cedar wood and the scarlet thread. You have to get them all ready. And then you do the shechita on one of the birds and spill out its blood into a bowl, and then you take these three items with the live bird and dip it into the blood, the blood that's mixed with water. So you're supposed to have all these ingredients all ready before you do the shechita. What if you do the shechita first, and then you're like, oh wait, where's that cedar wood, right? Where's that scarlet thread? And then you go and get them after. So this is an improper way of doing the shechita. So what's the consequences? Rabbi Yaakov says, since this animal was designated for the mitzvah, so it remains prohibited. Even though you didn't do it the right way, still the shechita is a shechita for this ritual, and therefore it's prohibited behana'ah. Rabbi Shimon Omer, even ishchata shelo kimisvata muteret. Rabbi Shimon said you didn't do the ritual in the proper way, therefore it's the ritual's invalid, the shechita is invalid, and it remains permitted. The bird remains permitted. That is the source of the Braita. Rabbi Yochanan elaborates. Ad kana plige elamos sabah shechita shenaruya shema shechita. Omor sabah shechita shenaruya la shema shechita. Dekula amamiya mechayim la mitasera. So what's the point of their machloket? Well, one opinion, Rabbi Yaakov, the first one, says that shechita that is not done in a proper way is still called shechita, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, from now on, at the time of shechita, Rabbi Yochanan says it becomes prohibited at the time of shechita, and even though you didn't do the shechita in the proper way with all the ingredients set up, nevertheless it is called a shechita, and therefore becomes prohibited from that point on. Whereas Rabbi Shimon thinks that since you did the shechita in an improper way, it's not called shechita at all, and therefore it does not become prohibited. But what we see here, that's the Esed Machloket. But everybody agrees that before you do Shechita, it's permitted, right? Because if it was already prohibited before you did Shechita, then it wouldn't matter if you did Shechita properly or improperly. It was already prohibited from before. So this is a proof for the Yochanan. Certainly the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, right? That it's permitted. That means it was because the shechita is invalid. That means it was permitted beforehand. So Resh Lakish, in fact, cannot explain this. This baraita. Instead, he defends himself by saying he can rely on a different baraita. Tana'ehi says, you're right, that opinion follows you. It is a support for you, Rabbi Yochanan, but I have a different baraita. The Tana debe Rabbi Yishmael, and here is a baraita. Nemar machshir u'mechaper mifnim, nemar machshir u'mechaper bachutz. The Torah talks about different types of korbanot that can enable or atone that are done in the Bet HaMikdash, and it also talks about enabling and atoning rituals that are done outside of the Bet HaMikdash. Ma machshir mechaper hamor bifnim asa bo machshir kimchaper af machshir mechaper hamor bachutz asa bo machshir kimchaper. Just like the an enabling ritual and the atoning ritual that are done in the Bet HaMikdash, they are equivalent. So too, the enabler and the atoning ritual that are done outside are also equivalent. Beforehand, we use this baraita to learn the very law that the birds are prohibited behana'ah. Now we're using this baraita to teach further that they become prohibited also while they're alive. Right? That's the point of the last part here. That the machshir that's done outside, that's the birds of the Mesorah, and the mechaper that's done outside is the eglah arufa, are the same in that even before you kill the eglah arufa, it's already prohibited, right, from the time that you bring it to the valley. So too, the birds, even before you kill one of them, they are already prohibited. That's from the time of designation. And so this is Resh Lakish's logic that he started out with. But his claim is that this baraita that we already used to learn the very prohibition of the Isur Hana'ah gives further support because it's comparing them so closely. Since we learned the very prohibition from Eglah Arufa, so too we should learn that the timing is also while it is still alive. All right, so now that's it. Resh Lakish was able to respond to all of the challenges from Rabbi Yochanan. Now that we mentioned a braita regarding the kosher and non-kosher animals, we're going to come back to that. Gufa, kol sipor teora tochelu, lerabot et hamishulachat, v'zeh shelo tochlu mehem lerabot et hashechuta. When the Torah regarding kosher birds says all kosher birds, that comes to include the one that's sent away. While you're using it, it may be prohibited. But once you send it away, then it's permitted. And the phrase that says, and these are the birds that you cannot eat, that comes to include the bird that you did shechita on, the leper for the Mesorah, that remains prohibited forever. Now we ask, v'ipuch anan, why not reverse these derivations and say the opposite, that the one that's sent away is prohibited, and the one that you did shechita on now becomes permitted. How do you decide which one is which? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, lo masinu ba'alei chayim she'asurim. So Rabbi Yochanan says, name Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, we never find that live animals are prohibited. And so this one that you're sending away, you want to say that asher lo tochilu mehem, this is what you can't use. When you take that live bird and when you send it away, it remains prohibited forever. It's flying around wherever it goes. Since it was used for the Mesorah ritual and it was dipped into blood, so now it remains prohibited forever. But that's impossible. Where else do we see any example of a live animal that's prohibited? Dead animals could be prohibited in different ways. But how about not a live animal, meaning permanently prohibited, right? You have something that's designated as a korban is prohibited, but that's all, until you do the shechita and the ritual. But where do we see that an animal becomes permanently prohibited while it's alive? So we actually say we're going to answer that and say actually there are some examples. Matkif la'arav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak velo hare mukse v'ne'ayba de'balei chayim ninhu va'asireh, or an animal that's either set aside for idolatry or that actually was worshipped as idolatry. These are live animals, and yet they are prohibited. You're not allowed to use it as a korban. If you have an animal that someone set aside or used for avodah zarah, you can't go and take that and bring it as a korban. It's prohibited. So you see, that's a live animal that's permanently prohibited. But we answer, no, ki asireh legavo lehejot mishras shareh. No, but that is only prohibited to make it into a sacrifice. But if you want to use it for personal use, you're allowed to. You want to go and take this ox that someone worshipped and you want to plow with it, that's fine. It's actually you're degrading it, so that's fine. You can plow with it. So it's not actually prohibited for personal use. We want something that's prohibited for hana'ah, for you to use. Matkif la Rabbi Yirmiyah. Okay, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, I have an example. You have an animal that copulated either with a man or a woman, and there were witnesses there. That animal gets sentenced to be stoned to death. Now, even while it's alive, it's prohibited. It's prohibited forever, and it's prohibited even for anyone to use asur behana'ah. So we'd see that there is such an example of an animal that is asur behana'ah. Ela amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai lo masinu rov ba'alei hayim she'asurim. Rabbi Yochanan says here, what I meant to say is that we don't find many examples of an animal that's permanently prohibited while it's still alive. You're right there. Okay, you can find one or two examples, but mostly not, and therefore it doesn't make sense to say that in this baraita, the one that goes free would be the one that's prohibited forever. That's very unlikely. Here's another answer of how we know that the one that is alive the one that goes free is the permitted one, because the pasuk says v'shilach al penei hasadeh. After you're done with that bird that you dipped into the blood, you let it go into an open field. So what's with the open field? Kisadeh masadeh muteret afinam muteret. It's like a field, just like an open field is permitted. Anybody can go walk around in an open field. So too, this bird that goes to the open field, it's free now, free as a bird. And it's permitted. Anyone can go and take it, and if they want, they can use it. Hi sadeh lahachiu dahata. Now we challenge this answer. We said the word sadeh. You're saying it comes to tell us that you can use that bird that goes free, but we need the word sadeh for a different halacha. Hahumi ba'ele lichadatanya sadeh shelo yamod beyafo v'zriken alayam begvat v'zriken alamidbar v'shelo yamod chutz la'ir v'zriken betoch ha'ir ela kol shomed ba'ir v'zriken achutz la'choma. The word sadeh teaches us a different halacha, that you can't be, let's say you're doing the ritual in Yafo, and then you take the live bird when you're done with it, the Kohen, and throws it towards the sea. Not allowed. It has to throw it to a field. And let's say you're in some place called Givat. We don't know exactly where it is, but somewhere near a desert, and you throw it into the desert. Not allowed. It has to be thrown into a field. Let's say you're standing outside the city, and then the Kohen does it outside the city, and he throws it into the city. No good. It has to rather be that you're in the city. The Kohen who's doing it has to be in the city, and he has to throw it over the wall into the field. So we learn from the sadeh, the word sadeh, that has to be done precisely in this way. So now, since sadeh is already used, I can't use it for this other halacha. Okay, so v'idach, the Tanah from the Beit Ishmael, who did use the word sadeh in order to teach me that it's free and permitted like the sadeh. So what is he going to do? Because we already used up this word sadeh. So he could say, Im ken nichtov keras sadeh, mai hasadeh shema'amina tarteh. The extra hayidiyah means that we can learn two things from this word sadeh. One, that you have to be inside the city and throw it into a field. And the other is that once you're done with the bird, and you throw it into freedom, then it's permitted. Anyone who catches it later on will be able to use it. That's the second answer. Rava gives yet a third answer of how we know that back in that Braita, when it says these are the birds that are permitted, it's the one that goes free that now is permitted to eat and to get benefit from it. And we're not going to use the other pasuk and say it's prohibited. Why do we choose it that way? Rava says, I don't need a derivation, I don't need an extra pasuk. Rather, it's simple logic. Rava amar lo amra Torah shelach letakala. the Torah would not say, take this live bird, that the one that you finished with it, and send it if it's going to cause a stumbling block. Because you're going to have a bird. Let's say it's prohibited, right? That's the one that's prohibited. So now you have a bird that you used for this Mesorat ritual, and now you let it go free, and now it's going and flying around. Who knows where it goes? And one day someone may catch it, and it's a kosher bird, and then he'll go and he'll eat it, or he'll whatever he wants to do with that bird. And he will have no idea that this is a prohibited bird. So the Torah would not set up a situation that will lead to failure, that someone may very well catch it and have no idea that's prohibited. So therefore, it's illogical that the Torah would have a law that would cause stumbling block to someone who would catch it. Therefore, it has to be that this bird is permitted, and I don't need any other proof more than that. Okay, Bis'ar Nazir, the hair of a Nazir that he cuts at the end of his Nizirut, is prohibited behana'ah, so you can't use it for Kiddushin. Minelan, how do you know? The Markera Kadosh Yeh Gadel Pera Se'ar Rosho. Gidulo Yeh Kodesh. The Pasuk says that the Nazir's hair is holy, Kadosh. So since it's kadosh, you can't use it for any personal benefit. Ima kodesh tofeset damav yoseh lechuli nafsar nazir tofeset damav yoseh lechuli, and if it's like hekdesh, so then it should be similar to hekdesh, that you could be able to redeem its holiness into money and then be able to use the hair. So is that true? No, but it's not true, because in the Mishnah itself it said that if you would sell any of things on this list, including selling the hair of a Nazir, then that money can be used for Kiddushin, because the holiness does not transfer to the money. So, but if it's like Hekdesh, so why not? Mi Karinan Kodesh, Kadosh Karinan. No, it doesn't say that Kodesh, that's holy, but rather Kadosh, a stronger word. And therefore, it is holy in itself and cannot be redeemed like Hekdesh could be. Bepeter Hamor. Now, firstborn donkey has holiness like any firstborn human or firstborn kosher animal. But a hamor is not kosher, and therefore the ideal solution is to redeem it with a sheep. And then once you offer the sheep, he gives the farmer will give the sheep to the kohen, and then the hamor becomes his own property, and he can use the hamor. But if he doesn't redeem it with a sheep, then the chamor's neck is broken, and it's prohibited. So right now we're assuming it's prohibited from the time it's born, unless you redeem it, and it will remain prohibited during that time, and also after you break its neck, it will remain prohibited. Rabbi Shimon matir. It seems that this Mishnah does not follow Rabbi Shimon, because in the Braita it says that a firstborn hamor is prohibited b'hana'ah. That's Rabbi Yehuda, so that accords with our Mishnah. But Rabbi Shimon says a firstborn hamor is permitted to get benefit from it. So it seems to be against the Mishnah. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Abuda, Har Arifat Divrei Hakol. Rav Nachman says, no, our Mishnah is not talking about from the time it's born. It could be that from the time it's born, it is permitted. You still have to do the redemption. But everyone would agree, even Rabbi Shimon, that if you don't do the redemption and you end up having to break its neck, that from that point on, it certainly is prohibited behana'ah, and that's what the Mishnah was talking about, using that kind of animal for Kiddushin. Basar behalav, meat cooked in milk, is prohibited to have benefit. Minelan detana debe Rabbi Ishmael lo tebashel gedi b'chalev imo shalosh pe'amim, echad isur achila v'echad isur hana'ah v'echad isur bishul. We learn this from a braita from the school of Rabbi Ishmael. Since the Torah repeats 3 times that one should not cook a kid in its mother's milk, one of them teaches me that it's prohibited to eat. Another that's prohibited to have benefit, and the third one, which is the simple reading, is that it's prohibited to cook. That's the derivation. Matnitin delaki haytana detanya. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer basar b'chalav asur b'achila mutar b'hana'ah shneimar ki am kadosh ata la'Hashem Elokecha lo tebashel gedi b'chalev imo u'olan omer v'anshei kodesh tiyuni ma la'lan asur b'achila mutar b'hana'ah afkan asur b'achila mutar b'hana'ah. Our Mishnah does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda in the Braita, who says that meat and milk cooked together, although you are not allowed to eat it, you are allowed to benefit from it. You can sell it. You can give it as a gift. As the pasuk says, you are a holy nation to Hashem, and therefore do not cook a kid in his mother's milk. And elsewhere regarding a nevela, an animal that died not from shechita, was shot in the head, died in a different way. That is prohibited from eating, but you're allowed to feed it to the dogs. You can sell it. You can get benefit from it. And regarding nevela, it also says anshe kodesh, you will be a holy nation. So since it talks about being holy in both of these contexts, just like regarding nevela, it's only prohibition of eating, not but benefiting is permitted. So too regarding meat and milk, only eating is prohibited and benefiting is permitted. So Am Mishnah does not agree with that opinion. And lastly for today, cholin shenishchatu ba'azara. If one takes a regular unconsecrated animal, you're supposed to do shechita outside of the Bet HaMikdash like we do today. You're not allowed to take that unconsecrated animal and do shechita on the Temple Mount, that in the temple courtyard. That is prohibited, and if you do that, not only do you violate this prohibition, but you're also not allowed to eat or benefit from that animal. Minahane mileh. What's the source? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Meir Amra Torah Shechot li b'sheli v'shelcha b'shelcha ma sheli b'shelcha asur af shelcha b'sheli asur. It's a simple analogy. The Torah Hashem says, slaughter what is mine in my area. You slaughter what is yours in your area. What is mine? That's talking about the sacrifices. If it's a holy animal, that's mine, God says, so then slaughter it in the temple. Whereas if it's yours, if it's unconsecrated animal, then slaughter it in your own area, meaning anywhere else. And just like if you slaughter my animal, a consecrated animal, outside, it's prohibited even from benefit. If you take a consecrated holy animal and you slaughter it outside the temple, it's prohibited b'hana'ah. So too, if you take your unconsecrated animal and slaughter it in my area, in the temple, then also it's prohibited b'hana'ah. Good, that's the source. Now we challenge the source. Ima sheli b'shelcha anush karet, af shelcha b'sheli anush karet. Hold on, that which is mine, if you slaughter it outside the Bet HaMikdash, you get karet. So, should we say also, by the same analogy, that if you take an unconsecrated animal and you slaughter it in the temple courtyard, also you would get karet? But that's not true. Amar kera ve'el petach ol moed lo hevi'o lakrib korban Hashem v'nichrat al korban anush karet v'al chulin shenishchatu b'azara en anush karet. No, the Torah specifies and says this you should bring. If you take a consecrated animal and you don't bring it to the entrance of Ol Moed, and in order to make it a korban, and you slaughter it outside, then that person gets karet. Only regarding a korban that you slaughter outside, you get karet. But if a unconsecrated animal that's done outside, there is no karet, because the Torah specifies only this gets karet and not that. Well, once we establish this, now this finding can undo the proof that we had started with. One could say that when you have sheli, a consecrated animal that's slaughtered outside, the reason why we're so stringent and say that it's prohibited behana'ah is because it also comes with a punishment of karet. But that wouldn't be true the other way around. If you take an unconsecrated animal and put it and slaughter it inside the temple courtyard, there is no karet, so maybe there is also no prohibition of getting benefit from it. So therefore that entire proof is replaced with a new one. Abaye says, here's where I'm going to learn it from. When the Torah is talking about in Vayikra chapter 3 about shelamim offerings, it talks about different species that one can bring it from. You can bring it from cattle, from sheep, from goats. And for each paragraph of those different types, it says ushchata, and he will slaughter it in the temple, in the courtyard, not temple, mishkan, shachatoto, then v'shachatoto again. Why do I need all these three verses? Not only that he slaughters it, but v'shachat oto, just say v'shachat. So what are these extra words coming to teach? That it's emphasizing that these have to be slaughtered in the courtyard. These are all sacrificial animals. Why do I have to emphasize this so many times? It's to teach me a few things. This is going to be a 3-step process. First, we're going to learn that other animals, all unconsecrated animals and birds, number one, you're not allowed to slaughter them inside the courtyard. That's a prohibition. Second, that you can't eat them. And finally, we're going to learn also that you can't get benefit from them. So here we go. So now we quote a pasuk from Sefer Devarim that says, if you live far away from the place that Hashem will choose, which ends up being Yerushalayim, and now you want to eat some meat, it's okay. You can take an unconsecrated animal and you can slaughter it in a regular way outside. Good. So that from that pasuk, I know that there are such things that you don't have to and can't slaughter in the Bet HaMikdash. Okay. Berichuk makom atazobeach v'atazobeach makom karov perad lecholin shelo yishchatu ba'azara. So from this pasuk, we learn that if something is done far away, meaning an unconsecrated animal, that you're allowed to slaughter for your own consumption, but you cannot take that animal unconsecrated and slaughter it in a close place, meaning in the temple courtyard. So from here, I learned that holin, unconsecrated animals, you cannot slaughter in the courtyard. Fine. So I know just from that pasuk, because it says, if something is far away, so then you can slaughter it far away. Okay, you could have to slaughter it far away, not in the temple courtyard. That's just regular unconsecrated animals. From that, I know that you can't take good, nice animals that have no blemish, that otherwise you could have brought them. If you consecrated it, you could have brought them. So that you have to keep far away because it's too similar. So you can't confuse them. But what about an animal that has a blemish? I might have thought maybe if it has a blemish, I can slaughter it in the courtyard because it's not sacrificable anyway. So maybe it would be allowed. So one of these extra words here is going to come to include in the prohibition something that has mum, because it comes from a species that is a kosher species. This is it's a sheep. It's otherwise a good sheep, but has a mum. So only because of that, it can't be brought as a sacrifice. But otherwise, sheep in general can be brought. So that's this also. If you can eat it, only if it's outside the. You have to slaughter it outside. You can't slaughter it inside. But how do I know that I can't take a wild animal like a deer that's kosher and slaughter in the Bet HaMikdash, since no deer, no chayot are ever used as a sacrifice? So maybe this one I can bring in. I'm not going to confuse it. No, I have to include this in the prohibition also, because even though it's a chaya and you can't sacrifice it, but you have to slaughter it, and with the similar rules to an animal that needs slaughter. So since it needs slaughter, you have to slaughter it outside the courtyard and not in. That's also prohibited. How about birds, which are different, a different species? Birds also, a regular unconsecrated bird, you're not allowed to slaughter it in the courtyard. So you have three times that the pasuk says slaughter it, meaning only a sacrificial animal on the altar, and not regular animals, not if it has a blemish, not a chaya, and not an off. So far, I learned that all these things are prohibited. Now, but I don't know what the consequence is. What if I did? Maybe, okay, fine, I'm not allowed to slaughter these unconsecrated animals in the courtyard, but if I did, maybe I'm still allowed to eat it. תלמוד לומר כי ירחק ממך מקום וזבחת ואכלת מה שאתה זובח בכל מקום אתה אוכל ואתה אוכל מה שאתה זובח במקום קרוב פרט לחולין שנשחטו בעזרה. No, the pasuk says when you live far away and you're going to eat, so then slaughter it and then you eat it. That means you can only eat it if you slaughtered it outside the courtyard. Richuk makom far away means outside. And if you do it b'makom karov, meaning inside the courtyard, then you're not allowed to eat it. So that's how I know that cholin, the very unconsecrated animals that I slaughtered in the azara, that's how I know that you cannot eat it if you did it. B'di'avad. Even b'di'avad. Fine, now I know that that's true for unblemished animals that otherwise I could have brought it as a korban. that if I do shechita in the courtyard, I'm not allowed to eat it. How about Baalei Momin, which really I couldn't sacrifice anyway, so they're very more distant. Maybe that if I brought it in and I slaughtered it in the Bet HaMikdash, I would be allowed to eat it. So these words, the extra words, we're going to use them again to say not only are you not allowed to do it, you're not allowed to eat it if you do it, because it's the same species of a kosher animal. How about a chaya, which is not a species of something that could be sacrificed? Nevertheless, you'd have to do shechita on a chaya like a behema, so therefore another v'shachat oto comes to teach that. And how do you know birds? That if you slaughter it in this courtyard, is not allowed to eat it? From the other v'shachat oto. So now, so far, we have two steps. I learned that you're not allowed to slaughter any of these things out in the courtyard. And second, that if you do, you're not allowed to eat them. But what about Isur Hana'ah? But maybe, I know I'm not allowed to slaughter it and I won't be able to eat it. But maybe if I did, I can get benefit from it by feeding it to my dogs. Regarding Nevela, it says that you don't eat it, but you can feed it to the dogs, meaning only that, only in Nevela, you can feed to the dogs, but unconsecrated animals, chayot, birds, all these things that if you slaughter them in the temple courtyard, you cannot feed them to the dogs, and this is the derivation that they are prohibited. Behana'a. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.